Joining me is Peter Jennings, a former Deputy Secretary for Strategy in the Defence Department, now Director of Strategic Analysis Australia. Peter, always good to see you. What do you now expect to happen in this war?
Well, the US is giving itself an option to launch military operations against Iran, I think, in the next week or so, Andrew. I think if they choose to go down that path, the first and most obvious target will be those deeply buried nuclear facilities at Fordow, for which those bunker-busting bombs are apparently the thing that's necessary, although actually I think that the Israelis probably have more subtle means to disrupt them. But it seems to me, looking at the movement of the carrier battle groups, and in particular those air-to-air refuelers into Europe, what that's telling me is that the Americans are now very seriously considering being part of a strike option. I don't think they'll go more broadly than the nuclear facilities and perhaps some missile facilities. They'll leave it to Israel to go after the military high command and the political leadership of the country. But I agree with your editorial that there is no way to go back to negotiation at this point, no way to trust the Iranians after decades of their own duplicity on this issue in terms of building nuclear capabilities. And so now the United States needs to follow Israel's lead and consolidate this result, which means that Iran cannot have, as Trump says, a nuclear weapon. And maybe that leads to regime change, maybe it doesn't. But I think that's what the Americans will be focused on in the next 5 or 6 days.
See, I was always in doubt whether Trump was pretending he knew all along about this and going along with the Israeli strike on Iran, didn't want to seem in the dark, a follower of events, or, you know, was he really backing Israel? I think that, like you said, by moving all these forces, the aircraft carrier groups and the air-to-air refuelers, it suggests that it is part of a plan. But the Albanese government has refused to back Israel's attack on the Iranian nuclear sites like Trump clearly is. It says, no, this should be settled with negotiations. Was that really possible? Do you think there's an excuse for this kind of pusillanimous, wringing of hands by this government?
Yes, I mean, it is pusillanimous. It's resorting to diplomatic language which no longer has meaning or substance in the context of the conflict which is currently unfolding. Trump, after years of trying, after several American administrations of trying, and after Trump gave the Iranians 5 rounds of talks over 60 days to try and demonstrate that they were prepared to verifiably give up their nuclear capability, they refused to do so. And now we're at a point where, Israel is probably 60 or 70% into a decisive military campaign to destroy that capability. And our government is saying, let's go back to the negotiation table. All that would do is give the mullahs time to reconstitute, to re-establish senior military and Quds Force leadership, and to try to go back to building that nuclear program. That's not the right answer. Sometimes military operations have to be given the scope to actually move to their intended target. I think Trump now realises that point. Like you, Andrew, I wasn't sure that he would actually back the Israelis, but I think he now understands that's what he needs to do based on his direct experience of Iranian failure and direct experience of Israeli success. He wouldn't be contemplating this if the Israelis hadn't made a marvellous success of their attack on Iran. But that's where we're at now, and so I think we are locked into further military operations, and Australian hand-wringing about that just shows that we really are not, seriously in the strategy business any longer.
And finally, the Prime Minister's failure to get a meeting with Trump in Canada, how serious is that?
It's absolutely serious. Look, for a long-term, dependable ally, Trump could have found 20 minutes for Anthony Albanese today. He could even have said, get on Air Force One with me and we'll talk about it and fly to Washington, D.C. He chose not to do that. That demonstrates to me that Trump has no time for Albanese. He has complete despair, frankly, at our government's failure to take our own defence interests seriously. And I think this is going to be reflected in that 30-day AUKUS review, the results of which is now going to come out without any Australian attempt by our Prime Minister to try and shape that review. It's a really bad outcome. But I think one that Albanese in some respects actually wants, because it means he can do less on defence and look strong standing up to President Trump. Maybe that's the objective that Albanese is trying to achieve for himself.
Well, I fear, Peter, it would also be an excuse for him to continue to appease China. You can't fight China, we don't have subs, he'll appease it, and I think that would suit his natural inclinations. Peter Jennings, thank you so much for your time.